Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third Masterclass here from H-From College. As you know, our main theme is the startup journey, which we will cover various themes in additional Masterclasses. Today, we're focusing on one specific topic, which is startup funding. It's a key topic because, as we know, in the startup journey, everything is wonderful until you have to go out and get people's money. And since this is one of the most difficult aspects of a startup's life cycle, we wanted to dedicate a specific session to this topic. And I also have a special guest who I will introduce in a moment. So welcome, as I said. The focus of this class will be on four themes in particular. So we're going to be looking at defining what is startup funding and why we need it. Number two, the secrets behind fundraising and what we can do or what we should pay attention to as we're fundraising. The third, the sources where we can find funding, which is obviously very important because you need to know where to look. And final, last but not least, I'm going to be speaking with Sara about insights from the point of view from a venture capitalist, what works, what doesn't work, and a few other minor points that we'll cover along the way. So who's leading this class? Myself, I'm Timothy O'Connell. I'm a professor here at H-From College. I teach entrepreneurship, and I'm also the director of the bachelor program on business creation and entrepreneurship. I'm also the director of the Startup Center, and I'm also a founder and run various startups throughout the years. Here in H-Farm, I've followed the startups and the entrepreneur side of the H-Farm campus for more than 15 years. So I've indirectly or directly managed over 150 investments and hundreds of startups which have started from here. So I have a slight idea what works and doesn't work in startup funding, but I wasn't convinced that that was enough. So I invited a very good friend, Sara, here. And Sara Lovato is also in the space with me for many years. When did we start working together? 10 years ago?
Yeah, about 10 years ago.
Okay, so we were together in a project called HIT, the Hub International of Trentino, which was an area which was bringing together different areas of the ecosystem in the Trentino Valley, also working around funding and driving new innovation. But Sara went on from that also to go into the venture capital. She was one of the partners of United Ventures, one of Italy's leading venture groups. So hopefully we're going to have some great insights in our discussion. I'm sure you'll have it. And we'll see if my questions are up to the challenge. All right, so let's get right into it. What is startup funding, right? It seems obvious. We always talk, everyone thinks that you have a startup. Next thing you need to do is go out and get VC funding. It's not always that's really the case. And we'll look a little bit about how that can change. But the first thing I want to do is define what it means when we talk about startup funding, because this is a key element. And here, we always talk, it's a process of securing capital to build, scale your business, right? But this securing of capital also goes beyond the money. It's also about finding strategic partners that can help you grow, okay? And this is an extremely important point. We'll talk about this as we go forward. If you're raising money just for the cash flow, often things like banks are actually more effective because banks are there to give you money, you pay interest back, and you get the money back. Venture, especially venture capital, and some of the other forms of capital we're going to talk about, should be bringing additional value to the game, okay? And that's one of the key points that a lot of people underestimate, and that's one of the things that we'll talk a little bit about, like what type of extra value you should be looking for. So fundraising also has a key point in defining trust, so people can understand, okay, this is a company that I trust and founders I trust to do something. You show traction, you're showing that this is something that works, and it should be part of your strategy from the beginning of how you want to fund what you're doing, okay? So these are things that we're going to look at as we go forward. Why should you care about fundraising? This is another point, because it's basically what you need often if you're looking at a business which wants to scale quickly, grow quickly, and build value, right? It's one of the key elements that helps that. So I identified 5 areas here. Accelerating growth. You may have an amazing idea which is starting to work, but to accelerate that growth, you need additional capital, and often venture funding is a great way to do that, but there are other ways. Build credibility in the market. As a startup is moving into its later stage of development, having a big name behind it, a funding name, often helps bringing it to the next level. If we look at the example here in H-Farm of one of our success stories, Depop, and its exit, as a unicorn, a lot of that was built upon the fundraising and the backers who were part of that process. So, as Balaton came in, as groups like Housepring from Germany came in, as other US investors came in, that increased the value and the visibility of the startup itself. And so it wasn't just about money, it was about who was putting that money in. Fueling innovation, often you have an idea, the idea is growing, but you need to put extra cash into developing those ideas. Obviously, in the world of AI, this has become fuel is probably an understatement. It's more of an atomic energy, because the amount of fuel you need for some of these new companies is actually almost off the scales, because some of these companies are consuming billions per year, and that type of innovation and growth, it can't happen without venture backing. So this is obviously becoming more and more important as we get into deeper technologies. Extending your runway, one of the things we always talk about when we're doing courses or working with young startups, if a startup no longer has cash, it no longer exists as a startup, okay? One of the things that a founder has to understand is that your number one job is, unfortunately, on various levels, okay? You don't have just one thing to do. You have many things to do. Number one is find a client who loves your product, and number two is finding cash to keep the company alive. And if either of those aren't working, it's basically impossible to have a successful startup, because if your clients aren't dying for your product, aren't happy with your product, and you run out of cash, both of those things basically are a sign of end game, right? And so having extended runway, having cash flow is extremely important. That's why we're fundraising. The last one, unlocking strategic support. As I said, many forms of fundraising or people who are investing in ventures, from angels to venture capitalists, are one of your best strategic partners if you select them correctly. And so this would be a huge support area. Just to start off the discussion, this is a great quote from Paul Graham from Y Combinator, the founder, ex-CEO. I don't know if any of you know Y Combinator. The second CEO of Y Combinator is another slightly known person called Sam Altman, who's now the founder of OpenAI. It's had a fair amount of success in its history. And one of the things he said about this is fundraising is the second hardest thing in starting a startup. Now the question is, can you guess what the first hardest thing is? It's exactly what I said before. Finding a product that people want, okay? So building a product that people are dying for it's hard, but it's also hard to find the money to support that. So when you put those two things together, that kind of gives you the focus of any founder among the other million things they're doing, okay? All right, so let me just run through, and if you want to join in any of these, feel free. I tried to identify 5 areas. Secrets is a big word. Let's say 5 areas that you should know about if you're a young entrepreneur or a founder looking to raise money. There are things that we as ventures, so investors, are looking for, and it's what we've seen successful startups using. So these are 5 that we can go through right away. And the first of this is clear value. When you have a company, and when you're pitching a company, and when you're talking to an investor, it needs to be 100% clear where the value of what you're doing is. So what problem you're solving, and what is the solution that you're using to do that. The value, you can't have a gray area, well, we're going to do this, but we're thinking about that, and we might try this. It just has to be super, super clear. This is where you're creating value. And either the investor is going to say, oh, I like that, and it's something that resonates to me, so I'm interested in investing, or it's not. So this is kind of like your first gate, okay? At this point, they're going to say, this is a problem set that I'm interested in, or it's not. This is kind of your first step of getting through the door. There are other steps, unfortunately, so this is just your first. But if you get this wrong, most investors won't even, they'll have already turned off their brains, they'll already be thinking about when their next meeting's coming on. So you've got to make sure that you have it clear in your head. It's not saying that every investor is going to like where your value is going. They may not believe that the problem you're solving is something we're solving. That doesn't matter. That's why you need to see many, many different investors to find the right one. but it's important that it's clear in your head and in the investor itself. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, be very simple, as you said. Most probably the problems you will be focusing on will be pretty complex, but you have to assume that the person you're talking to, a great investor, etc., but might not be super competent on that specific field. So you need to be able to simplify your message, convey in simple words the problem and your solution. So be very simple.
I always tell this story to students when I'm in lectures. I had the good fortune or not, because it kind of dates me. I was at an event, it was a great event we had here in Venice, where we had the founders of Instagram and Dropbox. And they were presenting their products, and Instagram I got right away. Okay, I felt good, you know. which if any of you know, Instagram used to be called, it was called Bourbon. It was not a photo sharing app. It actually did something else, but they found that the customers liked photo sharing, and that was, you know, where they got their value and became, you know, the first billion-dollar app to be bought by Meta. Whereas Dropbox presented us, the founders, what they were doing, and you explained it using clouds, right? You're saying, okay, you can imagine there's a cloud, and all your information goes in the cloud, and then you can get it where you want. I can guarantee you, I had no idea what he's talking about. It just, today, for all of us, we don't even think about the cloud anymore, but in that period of time, the idea that my computer was sitting up on some cloud somewhere just wasn't, it took me at least another 2 meetings in that world for me to start to understand. So this was, you know, it's interesting. So I would have invested in Instagram, but I wouldn't have invested in Dropbox in that year. Unfortunately, I didn't invest in either. So to make a long story short, it didn't work. The second, and this sounds almost banal. It sounds simple to say to you that you need an effective pitch. But I can guarantee you that let's say, if every 20 startups that come and present something to us, usually we have 2, so 1 out of 10, more or less, that have a pitch which actually effectively expresses what they're doing. Unfortunately, it's not rocket science. There's great studies, there's great research that shows you what you should include in your pitch. Do the research and make sure the pitch is just saying exactly what the investor needs to hear. You know, make things clear, make it simple, because like I said, all you're trying to do is get to investors and say, oh, okay, that's interesting, let's talk further. You're gonna have another 50 meetings anyhow. I mean, you know, they're not writing a check. So all you need to do is getting that effective pitch down is extremely important, and being able to do it. We see often, we have high school students who are better at pitching than some of our startups raising 3 or 4 million. And that's not a good thing, right? So you need to take the time to understand how to set up an effective pitch. This is an easy one, so I'll let you out of this one. This is always, almost all ventures will always tell you, I invest in teams, you know, and I love it. It's a great concept, right? You know, there's like, oh, I invest in teams, I invest in teams. It's not entirely true, I think. Teams are fundamental in that final selection of who you're going to invest in. But if you're not working on a great problem and you're not doing something that they believe is going to create value, you're still probably not getting an investment. What's true is you can have the greatest idea in the world, but if your team is not up to the task, you won't get investment. So you need to balance those two. So you can have great ideas, but you also need to have a great team to be able to do that. Because if you do try one without the other, it's very difficult. I don't know what your thoughts on that.
Completely agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number 4, the networking you need to do to raise a fund, raise money for your startup. I would ask a question in the group, most of you are online. This is a simple fact that I think most people don't know, especially startups, and I think it's extremely important to put in your head very quickly. The average number of meetings with investors necessary to close a seed or A round is about 100. And so when I talk to early startups who are doing early round investing here in Europe, or here especially in Italy, they tell me, oh, I've already spoke to 20 investors, you know, we're not getting where. I say, great, you've done 20%. Now you need to meet another 80. And that number is going up dramatically. The last statistic I saw coming out of the US, that now the average number of meetings with investors to close a seed round is now over 120. So this is just to give you guys an idea, the level of difficulty. And this is on 2 levels, because I don't even know if there's 120 ventures in Italy. So that means that, because it's all a numbers game, and if in the Italian market there are only about, let's pretend there's 50 active investors, that means you need to start building a network outside of Italy, because you might not close them within this network, because the Italian investors is a very small field, okay? So that means you need to start thinking about investors in the UK, maybe France, Spain, Portugal, other countries, because you need to hit that 100 to be able to close your round, okay? This is a very complicated part of the problem, and that's why networking is extremely important. And I always recommend to young startups is there's some wonderful events around Europe, Viva Tech in Paris, which is coming up very soon, Slush in Finland, which is in November, December, Web Summit, Italian startup. I mean, there's lots of events going on. You need to start participating in these events and networking to know people, know other startups who can introduce you to their investors, knowing investors who can introduce you to other investors, and you need to start building up that network, because unfortunately, sitting at home with an amazing idea and expecting everything to happen around you is basically impossible. So you need to get out, you need to build a network, because the law of numbers says that you need to have 100 meetings in order to close an investment. And that's a really, really hard number. Unfortunately, I know, because I've gone through investment process, and trust me, when you get to number 50, you feel like, okay, I'm done. But you're only halfway. It's like, it's worse than a marathon. It's like you're doing, an Ironman, and you've just finished the swimming part, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, now I gotta do 100+ kilometers on a bike. And that's what fundraising is often about. So this is, just to give you an idea of the process, it is a difficult process, but at the end, it's a process also which can bring great rewards if you find the right investor who believes in your idea. Any thoughts on this one?
No, I mean, it's super complicated, and you'll see, even with the investor that will end up to be actually your actual investor, you will see you will spend several hours just discussing your position with that investor. Consider that you have to multiply that for X number. You said 100, but
Yeah.
yes.
So and because if you think on the other side, the investors, how many meetings are you doing before you make an investment?
Oof. I don't know. And then I don't know the number of meetings, because then it depends. I'm counting on the hours. But in any case,
Yeah. Well, no, but not even the ones you make investments. So how many startups are you seeing before you choose one?
So consider that personally, usually I had an average of 700 startups per year to invest in 1 or 2.
So
usually 1.
I think I just confirmed my point on the numbers. So 700 to invest in one for one investor in one of Italy's largest investment groups. That's where the numbers are, you guys. So if you do that multiplication, you immediately see why we have this issue. So somebody has to understand it going into it, that I need to prepare myself for this process. The next one's I'm going to go quickly. Solid financials. If you build a financial model, you have a business plan, you're convinced this is the right plan, that's great. Show it to at least 20 people before, let them question it, let them check your numbers, because you do not want to present a plan which is full of holes to an investor, because they're going to find them. I mean, I'm not saying I'm talented at this, but I do have a certain amount of experience. Usually when a startup gives me a plan, I usually can find 3 or 4 of their weaknesses within 5 minutes. Because there's just certain things we know. There's certain areas that we know that where the growth are, certain costs that we know. And if we find it immediately, and you have them, the founders sitting there going, you lose credibility little by little. So you want to make sure that you test this with people. And there's a lot of people who are good at this. So just ask other friends, what do you think of this plan? Does this make sense? Are these numbers working? ChatGPT is even good at it now. You just throw it in and say, what's wrong with my plan? And it will tell you. You say, pretend you're a VC and tell me what's wrong with my numbers. Don't ask it to do your numbers. Okay? That doesn't work. Because unfortunately, I've seen it. The chats, they just invent things. And so the numbers come up completely off the wall. But they are good at finding things that aren't working. So you use it at a reverse level. And these are together kind of the main areas that that you as a founder, you as an entrepreneur need to start preparing yourself. So if you look back at all of this, there's 2 or 3 that you can start, even 1 year or 2 years before you decide to launch a startup. Building your network, finding the right people that can be part of your team, building a network of people who could be your investors in the future. These are all things you can start working on even as a student or even as a young entrepreneur before you actually launch your first company. Do not wait until you're, the day before you start fundraising to start building a network or to start building a team, because you need to plan much further ahead, okay? All right, now I'm gonna run through very quickly what I call fundraising sources, where we can find money, because then I wanna get into the good part of having a chat about venture here. So who can invest in your company? Well, the first person that can invest in the company is you. The concept of bootstrapping, on the one side, it was very sexy as a term, I'm bootstrapping. Now it's become a necessity. It's very, very hard today to get a company off the ground if you're not ready to bootstrap. If you're not ready to put in at least that first 3, 6 months, even 1 year into what you're doing before you start looking for external investors. Because most of the investors have gone, we say downstream. I don't know if you guys get the concept here. Downstream is, for a few years, the investors were going upstream. They were going towards earlier stage and they were like making bets. They figured out they weren't really good at that. So now they've all moved downstream. So now the typical answer of investors is, I like what you're working on. Come back when you have traction. Come back when you're making 5 or 6 million. And you're like, well, how can I make 5 or 6 million if no one puts money in my idea? One of the first ways that you do that is bootstrapping. So the more of your own energy and the other partners you brought on board you can put into this, and the more you can invest as a group, the better it is. And you should already try to figure it out before you start. I always say, as a rule of thumb, if there's 5 of you, you should at least be able to have 50,000. It should at least be 10,000 each of either time, money, resources that you can put into it, so you can give yourself 6 months to 1 year to get everything off the ground. Anything less than that is I wouldn't say it's impossible, but very difficult to raise money. So you as an entrepreneur, bootstrapping is super important. What the advantage is, it's simple, it's cheap, you don't have to negotiate complicated things, no dilution, you're still 100% of the company. The negative part, it's not other people's money, it's your money, it's your sweat and tears. So obviously that psychologically can be difficult. Next level is the famous friends and family, right? Also here, not to be underestimated. Most companies, even the famous Silicon Valley, unicorns or stars, were built up on money from friends and families. We were talking about Saturday. It's a very interesting fact. 2 of the richest people in the world are the mother and father. Actually, it's the stepfather, the mother and stepfather of Jeff Bezos. Why do you think they're the richest people in the world? They invested in Jeff Bezos' company, Amazon. Amazon didn't start. You look at Bill Gates with Microsoft. Many of these companies, at the end of the day, had early investments coming from the families of those companies. Sometimes it's the rich uncle, sometimes it's it's the parents, sometimes it's the grandparents. Doesn't matter. It's money that's easier to control. What's the negative thing of this? You feel very bad when you lose their money. So you have to always measure the level of commitment. What I always say is, do not accept money from friends and family, which is money that they would sorely miss. In the sense that if it's 10,000 or 50,000, that if they have it and they don't have it, nothing in their life will change, okay. If it's 50,000 that you lose, that all of a sudden they have to start putting the house on mortgage or selling a car, no good, okay? You need to keep it within a rationale of what we say in the States is, it's money that if you didn't have it, it wouldn't change your life, okay? And you need to make sure you have that discussion with those people. It's like, mom, dad, uncle, friend, whoever, I don't want you to put anything more than something that if you didn't have it, or if you had it, it wouldn't change your lives. And that's friends and family money. And it's very useful to get you to that next level, the end of that first year. And then you open up the next one, which is the famous business angels. And this is a group of people that on a professional level should be people who have a fair amount of wealth, people who are either successful entrepreneurs, sports, actors, people who have the ability to invest in things and actually make money. I don't know if people, you know Jared Leto, for example, from 30 Seconds to Mars, a singer. Jared Leto is filthy rich as a person, not because he's an amazing singer. Sorry, Jared. I spoke on a panel with Jared a few years ago. He's filthy rich because he invested very early in companies like Google, Meta, Uber, and all these companies because he had a very good friend working in Klein Perkins who together with him let him invest in these companies. And as an angel investor, he made millions, if not probably billions. And this is a type of group of person which is quite interesting because often there are people who are passionate, who are interested in investing, but they're not going to be as complicated as a venture because they're more in it for, I wouldn't say the fun, but they're in it because they like the space you're working in. So this is a very interesting area. So on a plus side, much easier to work in with a venture capital, not your family. So if you lose their money, you don't have to feel guilty and not show up at Christmas anymore because people are gonna beat up on you. But on the other side, these people often ask for equity in your company, and you have to be careful because sometimes angels, because they're not professional investors, they try to take more than they should. So you have to be a little bit careful. You can't give away your company to your first angel. You have to keep it within certain parameters. We set these parameters of around 10%. But that's just a rule of thumb. It could be less, it could be a little bit more, but definitely not 50% of your company. It should be a much smaller range. Last two, then we're going to get into the venture side, accelerators. So accelerators are a very interesting method. As we know, here in H-Farm, we've run over 25 accelerators across many, many industries. We've accelerated over 250 startups, some which went on to be huge successes, others which are dead and buried, and that's part of the process. The interesting thing about an accelerator is it's an easier way to enter capital investments at an earlier stage. Okay, so if you already have an idea, you have a team, and you want to start, let's say, moving towards more institutional money, an accelerator is a great way to do that. There are some amazing programs around the world. I put here a few links if anyone's interested. GAN, so the Global Accelerator Network, which is called MARO, has over 150 accelerators around the world, of which also H-Farm is part of. Techstars has a great network of startups. Y Combinator, of course, one of the more, let's say, complicated, but one of the best accelerators in the world. And they're all more or less taking between 2 and let's say maybe up to 5% of equity. So it's not game-changing. It's not going to completely ruin your cap table. But if you choose the right accelerator in the right market, they're a great, let's say, addition to your team to help you connect with other investors and other people going forward. On the negative side, if you choose the wrong accelerator, maybe you're in the wrong market or wrong equity, it could be a waste of time. You could end up wasting 4 months of your time doing something which wasn't going to bring your company ahead. So you need to make sure you choose an accelerator which is doing what you want. For example, in Italy, CDP, Casa Deposito e Prestito, has a network of over 20 accelerators, very verticalized, which gives you the ability to choose where you think it could be of interest to participate. And that's a great way to start your first, let's say, step into venture. These two I'm going to go very quickly. Bank debt, obviously it seems like not necessarily what you want to do as a startup, but it actually isn't a bad option for many different startup options because taking bank debt means you don't give away equity. It means you can get cash. It's usually a little bit simpler, obviously, than the endless negotiations with a venture. It has one small, one small negative side, which is you need to pay those loans back. So this works when you have a business which is going to be cash positive very quickly. And there are a lot of businesses that have that. So if you're starting, let's say, more of a consulting company as opposed to a startup company, and you think you can start generating cash in 6 months, probably a bank is your best option. You need to also here, you need to find the right bank. There are a lot of banks in Italy who have special programs to invest in startups, and they have very specific conditions. Often they don't start payments back until 6 months or one year later. They have low interest rates, so it's something to evaluate. Public grants, which is the last one before we get to the Holy Grail, is also an interesting road in Italy, in Europe, because of European funding, okay? Public grants can often be a great way to fund new enterprises, especially where there's lots of early investment. The problem with public grants is they're often very bureaucratically, they weigh you down with reporting, and all the bureaucratic work you have to put behind it. You have to be careful here, because often we've seen startups spending more time doing reporting to government funding than actually using the money. And obviously that's not what you want to be doing as a startup. But don't underestimate them, especially in places like we were talking before, Alto Adige, people were like in Bolzano stuff. There's some wonderful state or let's say regional backed programs where they're financing startups in a very easy way. And this could be very interesting for you going forward. We've reached to the point that's interesting. Crowdfunding I'm going to skip because I wanted to go right to here, which is venture capital. All right, venture capital is often seen as the holy grail of fundraising. It's like where you actually are. Let's say you're welcome to the big league. It's not really always the case. Venture capital could actually be not the right fit for your startup. But when it is the right fit, and when you are with a company, it needs to scale quickly, and it needs, let's say, risk capital, venture capital is obviously one of the most interesting. 10 years ago, in Italy, there wasn't that much venture capital. So obviously it was more of a dream of Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley, or other large funds. And that's why even groups like Depop, which is one of, as we said, one of the successes from H-Farm, the venture capital that backed Depop was not Italian. It was German and it was English, and then it became American. Today, thank goodness, we have venture capital, which is building up, and Sara has experience with that, working with United Ventures coming out of Milan, who's one of our biggest funds in Italy. So today, this is a valid option. The problem is we need to be careful of how we approach venture capital, because like I said, it's a very complicated space that you can end up wasting lots of time without having the returns that you want. So that leads us into our next discussion. Okay, this is interesting. This is just kind of mapping up the difficulty to obtain the money with the amount of money you can receive. And this gives you an idea of where we are. VC is obviously you have access to a lot more money, but the difficulty of attaining it is increased dramatically. Whereas, as we said, bootstrapping is the easiest of all. And so you need to figure out in this timeline, where do you think you should be? Okay. Let's start our discussion. Sara, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So I would love to talk a little bit. So the first thing I would ask is, who is Sara Lovato? Who are you? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So, well, I started my career as a lawyer. So something you will see. They always make jokes about lawyers turning into something different.
Yeah.
But in any case, in the US and in Italy, so I already started with a broader idea of how the world works in any case, and I have to say, in the long run, it turned out to be very useful, as we will explore.
There's a lot of legal things going on in the world.
Exactly. So I understood quite quickly that was not exactly for me. I was super curious to understand why that contract ended up on my desk. Well, I have to say, by chance, I moved. I was working in New York, Milan, Washington, and then I dropped everything and I moved to Trento, which is, as you know, a small town and closer to the Dolomites. And pretty much by chance, I started working with startups, so supporting startups in their pre-seed stage. Some of them were in the technology transfer space, so with heavy technology coming out from the research centers or universities, and supporting them in their first steps towards building the company and getting funds, basically. And After that, I mean, by the way, that's where I
met.
met. Yeah, I met him, and after that, I just basically jumped the fence and moved to the other side, and became an investor with United Ventures. So I invested with them for 5 years, and I started as an investment manager with their at the time the running fund, United Ventures 2. So the super interesting part for me was that I covered everything, and you will see venture VC funds, especially in Italy, but it's a fairly typical pretty much everywhere, are small teams, and you need to be entrepreneurial yourself.
There's actually a trend, it's funny, there's a trend right now because of AI. The VC firms that were at 20 are going down to 5 again.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's,
or solo VC.
yeah, they're actually reducing their, which is great on one side, but for it means it's even harder again for the founders.
Indeed.
Because if you have less people, have less contacts and less ways to get in touch with the firm. So it's, you know, it's interesting.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Good. All right, I ask you the first question. Tell us a little bit more about your experience as a venture capitalist.
Yeah, at first, I mean, I had worked with let's say, startups trying to raise funds with venture capital firms for a couple of years. But, you know, being on the other side was completely different.
700 meetings a year.
Indeed. and you know, how you look. So that's why I really enjoy these kind of discussions, because from my experience, what I was looking at from supporting startups going into venture capital is completely different from how a venture capital work looks at startups. So my experience was I started you know, as an investment manager, so I was doing everything, scouting for startup and understanding, analyzing the investment opportunity. So team, obviously number one, as we said, the business opportunity, technology. So when you scout for opportunities, you know, it's as you will see, you meet a lot of investors, and as an investor, you meet so many companies. So you open up to really a whole world. And the reason why I was telling right at the very beginning, be simple, is because investors get to meet so many different startups working on different fields. You cannot be, United Ventures specifically is a generalistic investor. So you might find different kind of investors who are more verticalized on a specific field. Most probably, hopefully, they will have a specific experience and expertise.
Cool.
But not everyone. So
that's what, I mean, we noticed that too. There are certain VCs, when you have meetings, when we go with our startups, that ask very generalist questions, and you need to learn to, you know, to be able to explain in a very easy way you're doing it. And then all of a sudden you get into very technical VCs who, like, all of a sudden they want to see the code, and you're like, and so you got to be ready for both of those, because if you're too complicated with the first, they're like, and if you aren't able to respond to the questions for the second, you could find yourself in difficulty.
Indeed.
Good. All right, next question for you. So you've seen the landscape. I mean, I've seen it, unfortunately, for almost 20 years. You've seen it for about the last 10 years. How have you seen the landscape change in venture capital here in Italy?
It has changed, and it is changing very rapidly.
Good or bad?
I don't want to answer that question.
Okay.
No, but I'll try to explain the dynamics. When I started approaching that the venture capital field, there were really a bunch of investors, like the bigger names that obviously even today you can find them. It's just 5, maybe.
Yeah, it's
pretty
5 or
much.
10 at the most.
Yes, exactly. So few, let's say, bigger investors, and that was it, pretty much. Yes, I'm only talking about VCs.
Yep.
But CDP particularly has started, to push this market. Very significantly, and so by now, we have a landscape of I don't know how many new
Yeah, I mean,
investors.
new funds, I heard,
funds.
it's like more or less almost like 20 every year coming into
Indeed.
it. I mean, it's growing dramatically.
And then, and if you'll do what Tim had just suggested you, so if you start networking, you will see, oh, I'm raising this fund, I'm raising another fund. So you will see so many different people raising funds. So
Which we needed, because if, I mean, what we didn't point out is the venture ecosystem here in Italy before that period, we were in the list, European, we're the seventh, Italy is the seventh or eighth economy in the world. And in that listing in Europe, we were like in 14, I mean, we had Greece in front of us, Portugal, Denmark, countries that are, a few million people. I mean, Italy was non-existent. So this growth was not only necessary, but it was just, I mean, we were almost living in a parallel universe. And what the Italians, especially all the Italians out there, everyone always looks at France, everyone hates to see France win. Well, this was like having France win every World Cup in soccer like 10 years in a row. I mean, they had billions and billions in the system, and we were like sitting there with still like a few $100 million. It was completely out of proportion. But so we finally seen this is starting to pick up. Unfortunately, France, they had the famous 2 billion, and now they added another 8, so we're always a
we
little
are
bit
always behind.
We're always behind.
Which is a good, we can look at it as, on the positive side, but we need to keep that in mind. And so there's a balance, especially as when you start learning about this, the VCs, you will see that there's a balance between public money, private money. So there's a difference there, and you'll have to understand and feel the difference.
Cool, good. I go to the next one. So beyond returns, I mean, obviously VC is the general partner. We didn't go into all the details of how a VC is built, but the general partner has a legal obligation to the limited partners to return on investment. So obviously the return on investment is critical. But what else are VCs looking for? I mean, apart from the fact they're looking to find the ones which are going to make a return investment, is there other things they're looking for in startups when they're choosing who to invest in?
Well, in terms of specifically, I mean, it's important to understand. This is not the time to discuss this, but I think it's really important to understand how a venture capital firm works. Because sometimes, for the logics of the main point obviously is the return, but sometimes your startup is extremely good and you will make money, a lot of money, but that investor will not invest in you because there are other logics behind the fund that determines whether whether the firm can invest in you or not. Beyond the fact that your company may be extremely successful, and that investor might even know that, but might not be able to actually invest. So
I noticed, for example, we run into a lot, the investor conflict, which is something a lot of people don't know. If the more vertical you get, the more likely you're going to find that your idea, they'll say, oh, we love your idea, but we have another investment which is similar, so we can't invest in you. So this conflict, this is another area that's underestimated when you go and talk to an investor. That often people say, oh, you invested in this company, which is basically the same as us, so you should invest in us. 90% of the time, if that's a serious investor, they'll say, we would love to, but we have a conflict of interest, so we cannot invest in both of you. So.
And I would say something else to pay attention to is what's the vintage of that fund, the running fund. So if you're, let's say there's an investor who invests from pre-seed to Series A, and you are in pre-seed stage, most probably. If the fund is investing is at that stage in which they are about to close the investment period, here we're probably going into technicalities, but in any case, they might
the fifth year more or less, because usually they're 10-year funds, but they stop investing after the 5th year more or less.
Okay, so if you're at the 4th year, let's say, and you are at pre-seed stage, maybe they might decide not to invest because they know, okay, I don't have the time to go for the long run with this company. So these are all technicalities, but it's really important to understand how a fund works in order for you to understand
Yeah.
the reasoning behind the investor's decision. They might not attain exactly specifically
Well,
to
and
your
you're actually
company.
lucky, if they're telling you no because of these reasonings, it
Yeah.
means that they actually are interested in you, but they can't invest, and that's already a good point.
Mhm.
When they say to you, oh, we love your idea, but it's just not what we're looking for, that basically means we don't like your idea. So you need to learn how to, I mean, I remember,
To translate.
we did some fundraising in Silicon Valley, many years ago for one of the startups, and I thought it was amazing, because the first 3 meetings, I was like, wow, everyone loves their idea, because they were all like, oh, we really like what you're working on, unfortunately it's not our space, but really wishing you luck. And I thought, well, they all love us, until someone told me, so that's actually VC speak, saying they hate your idea, you're never gonna make money, and they have no interest in what you're doing. And I was like, what? They said they love it. It's like, no, they said it to everyone, because they're in California, they're rich and they're happy, and so they don't really wanna make people unhappy. What they really say when they're interested is they start saying, hey, I need to understand more, it's interesting, but I want to do a deep dive, I want you to talk to this other person to do a deeper, because then they start going into the details, and that means that there is an interest.
Yeah.
I don't
Get
know in
into-
Italy if you have the same, we have the same depth, but
Absolutely.
that's VC.
So
Good.
getting to the first meeting, so, overcoming the pitch barrier, let's say, it's already a super good, a very great effort. But
Yeah.
then going to the second meeting, still.
Yeah. Then you need another 6.
Yeah, indeed. At
Okay.
least.
Next question. So how can a startup today, everyone's AI, everyone's doing things, in very specific spaces. How can you stand out in this market today? I know in Italy, there's just, hundreds of startups coming out of all these different ecosystems, but we still have a very small group of investors. What have you seen work that makes people think, oh, that's interesting?
I think passion. What I saw in my experience is that investors decide to invest mainly because they see founders who are very passionate about what they're doing. They know every single details. They can make it simple. They can transfer their ideas in a very simple way. And by knowing their business, I also mean fundraising.
Yeah.
So you need to learn, you need to be, obviously, hopefully, you will know every single detail of your business, the teeny tiny parts, just obviously the big vision, but also the teeny tiny operational things. So you have to own that. But part of your business may also be fundraising. So you have to understand the other player. And so going back, I'm sorry if I'm stressing this point, but it's really frustrating for an investor to talk to someone, to a founder, and that person does not understand what he or she is doing in raising capital.
Yeah.
So understanding the dynamics is super,
Which is
super
one of the reasons
important.
why we do masterclasses like
Indeed.
this, to
It's
help people
super-
understand that they need to go into these meetings with very clear understandings of where you are as a fund. These are all things they're all online.
Mhm.
And we're always amazed that if you're going in and you're talking to someone like Sara, and maybe they're at the last year of their fund, and you're like pre-seed, you probably realize that it's very difficult they're going to invest in you, because there's not enough time for them to get the return on investment. So all these details are things that you can find online very easily by reading where's the fund, what have they invested in, what's their sweet spot. So these are all things that you can find, and you should prep before a meeting. I found often founders will come in the meeting, they won't even know who they're talking to. They won't
Yeah.
even know who we are. And you're like, did you not have enough time to go on
To
LinkedIn? It's like, was it really that hard? So okay.
Indeed,
Good.
absolutely.
All right, the biggest mistakes that founders make when fundraising. What are some of the mistakes that we just mentioned one now, not understanding what fundraising is. What
Yeah.
other mistakes did you see that were?
Well, generally speaking, I will say ruining, so the first steps that you will make in the fundraising process, I wouldn't say that are the most important, but for some aspect they are, I think. Because if you make a mistake, like in the, you had that curve,
Yeah.
in the, not the bootstrapping, but the friends and family, business angels, and etc. If you make a mistake then, for example, you were mentioning, okay, 10% more or less
Yeah.
for, as an ownership that you give away to your early stage, super early stage investor, friends and family, or business angels. If you make a mistake then, you will say, oh, my mom, I'll give her 30% because you really need that money at that stage. It's not a big deal at that stage. I mean, 25, 10, 30, it's pretty much the same. You just want the money. But then hopefully you'll have a successful startups. As you move forward, that mistake will become much, much bigger and might even preclude you the opportunity to actually raise funds because you ruined your cap table. You have to have in mind that you need to build an equity story that makes sense for your company. So the balance between how much money you raise and the percentage that you give away needs to make sense in the long run.
Very good. We have examples where angel investors are become well known in the market, like here in Italy, as toxic investors. And you may not know it as a startup. You bring in this angel and you're like happy because they gave you a check for 50,000, and all of a sudden the next round you see all of VCs, ooh, you have that person, okay, we're not really interested. Because they know they try to hold deals hostage, they try to force things. And so you have to be careful also of who you bring on board as you grow, as you said. Like I remember going into later stages in the US, and they're like, yeah, but who are these Italian investors? I mean, what are their roles? And you had to explain it. And you could tell sometimes it was kind of like, taking down a bitter pill. They're like, well, can't we just clean them out? Which is, as you know, is a complicated process. So you have to be careful there. Good.
So again,
other mistakes you see, any things that you would see happen in these meetings that you think, oh no, not again?
Crazy enough, in my opinion, there are founders who will, usually a VC meeting, the first VC meeting is pretty general. Let's say you want to cover many things. You just have one another, but you want 1 hour, but you want to have like a general idea of what you're doing or what the founders are doing. And let's say the typical last question is, so how do you see what's your exit strategy? And some founders say, I want to keep my business running and pay dividends. And so again, it's a matter of understand what you're doing. And position yourself in such a place in which you can have
That's a delicate one too. I often see it because for me it's always a put off when you have a young early stage investor who's already talking about their exit, because you're like, come on, you haven't even started yet. But on the other side, they need to understand that the exit is what the VC is looking for. So if they want to be a VC backed startup, they need to understand that's part of the process. But I think they need to be a little bit careful. They can't it's not like, and I'm going to exit in 6 months. They need to understand it's a process.
To me, it's not a matter, and actually I would like to tap into what you said in terms of the financial planning and etc. The point is fairly the same that I would like to make. It's not just a matter of if you tell me that your exit, what you tell me makes sense in practical terms, but I want to know if you understand the process, the financial plan. When an investor invests in pre-seed, seed, or even Series A, investors know that you will not meet, most probably you will not meet, the financial plan. But what is super important is that you understand the metric, you understand the business. So it's not a matter of the numbers that, yes, they need to be
close
correct.
as possible.
Indeed. But what you don't have, the number needs to mirror a reasoning and a deep understanding of your business and understanding, how the metrics work. And again, going back to the exit strategy, it's not. I don't want you to tell me, I'm going to exit to Amazon or to. Who cares? We don't know. Or I'll do an IPO. You're a pre-seed stage. Who knows? But I want you to understand if you know your space, if you know how it works, if you're so.
Good.
And again, it's a way to understanding who I'm talking to at the end of the day.
Last question. Any advice for founders raising capital?
Don't raise capital. So bootstrap as much as you can. And no, raising capital, as we said, it's fairly complicated and it gets more complicated along the way. So it's super, super important to choose, because you go out and, as we said, it's very difficult to raise capital, but you get to put yourself in a position to be able, or in any case, to choose as much as possible your investor. And it's not just a matter of money, it's a matter of who joins you in this journey, which will be, I mean, complicated to say the least.
Yeah.
And it's not, and it's just the person. I mean, if you, I'm sorry, I'm using United Ventures as an example, but it's the same in every fund. It's United Ventures that invest in your fund, but you will be talking to me. I mean, not me anymore, because I'm not with United Venture anymore.
Yeah.
But in any case, you will be talking to that person for several years. I wouldn't say every day, but more or less. So you need to click on a personal level as well.
It's like bringing a partner on board in
Indeed.
the company. It's a partner who happens to have money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So that person needs to bring you value. You need to like that person.
Sure.
It will be a very close partner.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Time's up, so we'd like to thank everyone, and we will stay for questions. So if anyone wants to ask any questions or any feedback, we're very open. But for those of you who are online, thank you for attending. We will be doing another session on Startup the Journey and other areas going ahead. So follow all the different social channels to see what's up. And if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing in H-Farm, as the program director, as I said, for business creation entrepreneurship, this is our bachelor's program, which is actually going deep into these areas, including courses on funding and fundraising. So, hours and days of really going into the depth of this. And then we also have a master's in digital transformation and entrepreneurship. So those of you who have already finished your undergraduate and you want to do a master's degree, once again, another opportunity to look into what it means to build a startup and what it means to finance a startup. So thank everyone, and we'll see you on the next session coming up in the next couple of weeks probably. And thank you. So then we'll go ahead and do some questions.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So any questions from the audience? Take advantage of the fact that you have somebody here who knows how to fundraise and what it